Wait, what?
Welcome to Groovy Movies. My name is Lily Austin.
And my name's James Brailsford. Hello.
Hello. And this week we are taking quite a dark and stormy turn, much like these January skies. James, what are we talking
absolutely. We are talking about David Lynch's debut feature film from 1977, Eraserhead.
I'm beyond excited to talk about this. I wanted to talk about a David Lynch film because I have to admit this is a bit embarrassing, but I'm quite late to the David Lynch party. I only watched Twin Peaks during lockdown.
Oh, did you watch the from the beginning, the series one?
Me and friend of the pod Emily watched it together.
Oh, really?
And it was like our thing for the second lockdown, which was so appropriate for kind of the wintry. Do you remember how grim that second one was? And we would just, I think it started because we both came back, we were living together. This is far too much detail, but here I'm going with it. And we started watching it together and we'd be like, another Twin Peaks tonight? It became our thing. But actually, I think we got as far as season 3 maybe, but I don't think we finished it because it really does lose its way once David Lynch, well, as you explained to me, I was like, James, why does it go so crazy? Like too crazy, go so far off piste.
Yeah. Well, season 1 and 2 were the original run. Season 3 was when they brought it back in 2017. So there's 2 seasons from the OG 90s run.
But didn't David Lynch only write and direct the first series?
He was only heavily involved. He was heavily involved with season 1. Then he didn't have much to do with the first half or most of season 2, but he came back for the final 2 episodes.
Right, yes. And that was the thing. It was losing its magic a bit.
See, but rather perversely, which is a very classic how, if you from anyone who's listened to this show, I didn't watch season 1. I only started watching from season 2, which is the season where it lost its way. But I still loved it. I didn't know any better. What can I say?
But how did you... So I haven't actually seen any other David Lynch movie, I'm embarrassed to admit. And so I really wanted to do one. And I think I suggested Blue Velvet to you, but you said to me, no, we need to do Eraserhead because the production story is bonkers.
Yeah, I just thought because we're kind of we're talking about the production behind the films in kind of detail at the moment, I just thought by far and away the story behind Eraserhead, there's a lot there. It's a rich story once you start diving into it. And
boy, were you correct. I mean, part of me, it made me think, should this series be directors' debuts? That could be the thing. But I think that David Lynch is a very particular man. And actually, I think for most directors, often the really interesting stuff comes when they get a bit of money and a bit of more, the financial backing to do more creatively. Whereas David Lynch is so creative and so, I don't know, has such a strong vision and such an insane work ethic that it was already there from the very first film. He just needed the crew.
That's it. And I do wonder if he's struggled since he kind of worked on subsequent more like traditional Hollywood films where you have a crew and you have a budget and you have a time scale of a few months. Whereas, as we're going to get into it, he spent 5 years making Eraserhead. He was able to go at his own pace, which, I wonder how much it frustrates him having to kind of fit into a schedule where it's like, right, Dave, you got 90 days.
But James, tell me, before we get into attempting to discuss the plot, and full disclosure, guys, there are going to be spoilers because I don't think that this is the kind of film where spoilers can really spoil anything because no words are going to be able to do justice to the insanity that is this movie. So if you haven't seen it, I actually don't think it matters. But equally, you have to see it. So just pause and go watch it now. Okay, we'll let you do that. Okay, great. Now you're back. Thank you. Okay, James.
How are you feeling?
Yeah. Are you okay? Oh, God. Because, I mean, my feeling after seeing it, but we'll discuss that in a bit. I want to hear, first of all, so how did you come to Eraserhead? What's your origin story with the film?
Well, I mean, here's the plot twist, Lily, is the first time I watched it all the way through was this week for this podcast.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where, as a student in the 90s, a lot of people had the Eraserhead poster with Jack Nance with his shocking, like electrified hair
Mm.
on their wall. So it was very much a student kind of cult classic in the 90s. But of course, I was like, everyone's watched this cult classic. I'm not watching it, blah, blah, blah. And also, there's a part of me where I'd seen Twin Peaks first. My first exposure to David Lynch was either I can't remember which one came first, either Twin Peaks or watching Blue Velvet in my film studies extra class at college. So those are and I just thought, oh, Eraserhead's this like early work where it's clearly not going to be as well produced, and I don't know, I just didn't quite ever want to watch it. And then as I've gotten older, now you've seen Eraserhead, you do have to wonder when in your life do you think, you know what I fancy doing tonight? I'm going to sit down, kick back, get a pint of beer, and watch Eraserhead. That time has never really come. I tried watching it during lockdown, right? And
Oh
of course,
God.
halfway through, no, exactly that time and a place, Lily, and that was absolutely neither the time or the place. So I got halfway through and abandoned it. So
Okay, well that's good actually. That makes me feel a lot better because I really had no real understanding of what Eraserhead was. I realized I was in my head Eraserhead and Jarhead. There's a lot of heads in this sentence, but they had sort of merged. So I thought I wasn't sure, but I thought it was some kind of war film,
war film. Oh right, what a
maybe.
surprise!
But I
Yeah.
didn't really know. And I sort of thought it's strange that this film has this reputation, this cult reputation amongst serious film fans, if you will. And I don't know anything about it. But then the minute you watch the film, you start to understand why you know nothing about it because it is so strange and particular and heavy and gives you a very, for me, a very dark feeling in my stomach that, like,
Oh.
in the pit of your stomach that, like, I get why people aren't talking about this film all the time because, like you said, yeah, there's very rarely a moment to watch it. So,
Yeah, it's a film that I think probably is best experienced going to the cinema and
yeah.
watching it, in a dark room. I think that's where it's, like it found its audience because initially I don't, it was one of those ones where it found its audience at these midnight movie screenings, which it's a shame those kind of traditions don't exist anymore. But late night at these kind of fringe cinemas, it found its audience there. So imagine at midnight watching it with a bunch of friends in a darkened room, never not knowing what's about to happen. That is definitely its home. But yeah, the
Yeah.
whole film just feels like you are witnessing a nightmare that David Lynch has had, a recurrent nightmare. That's what it feels like.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about it. So it's a black and white film, and you meet this man played by Jack Nance, Henry, and he's in this suit that feels quite 50s. So or maybe 60s. So initially, the darkness of this film, because the whole thing was filmed at night and it's lit in a very particular way in every shot. It feels oppressively dark, and the
Mm.
world that they're in feels oppressively dark, like emotionally speaking. It's grim, and the thing that really gets into your bones is the sound design, right? It's haunting. How to even have come up with that is just like kind of extraordinary to me.
There's a quote that I put on a slide when I'm teaching the students at film school about sound, and it's from David Lynch, and it just says sound is 50% of the picture. And so, like, my
Yes.
filmmaking has definitely been inspired by and influenced by the sound design of David Lynch because he put so much effort into building this sonic world. So yeah,
Mm,
absolutely, the kind of the oppressive soundtrack matches the visuals that you're seeing so well that you can't imagine the two things separated.
exactly. And props to Alan Splatt, who was the sound
Mm.
designer, musician who came up with the soundtrack, as it were. Though it's very much sounds. It is truly soundtrack in the literal sense of the word.
Yeah.
And they worked on it for a year, coming up with the sound of the film, which again kind of speaks to like the particularness of this film.
The amount of detail, yeah, and you can hear it. Like it's a detailed soundtrack. It's not just like they've got a bunch of sound effects from a record and plonked them on. Everything you
Mm,
can tell has been custom recorded, has been considered, and it's something that I tell film students as well, and anybody who's interested in making a film is put a lot of work into your soundtrack because compared to shooting with actors on a set with a camera and a crew, sound design can cost you essentially that your own time is the
Mm.
only cost, really. You got to, nowadays with a computer, you can sit and you can sound design an entire world, and it doesn't cost you a fraction. In fact, you can say it almost costs nothing compared to actually shooting the visual aspect of the film. So put as much effort, if not more so, than you shoot into your sound design.
That's a very, very good tip. So come here for
Top tip there,
your
listeners. Yeah.
film tips as well. Bonus. And I think something about that sound design made me feel like I was watching initially my sense of what this film was about, knowing nothing going in, was
Oh,
that it's
interesting how it unfolds.
yeah, I thought this was a film about a post-nuclear world.
Possibly could
Maybe. I
it
mean,
could be,
it's
yeah.
so interesting reading interpretations after you've watched the film because yeah, that was my understanding, especially because we follow Jack Nance back to his apartment building and he meets this sexy lady. What was the name? She's listed as beautiful girl across the hall was
Yeah.
the character's name in the credits, played by Judith Anna Roberts very well. And he's a bit scared of her. And she has this energy of being quite lonely to me that, she's kind of desperate for some connection with someone. And obviously I know she's beautiful because you wouldn't think that like Jack Nance is so perfectly cast in this, but he's not like a heartthrob, right? He's like this kind of awkward man with this
Oh,
bizarre
yeah.
hair. So even that made me feel it is quite lockdown. Like it feels like everyone's in lockdown and all desperate for
Yeah.
human contact and we'll try it with anyone. But for some reason, Henry is intimidated by her sexuality was the vibe I got. And then he goes into his apartment and it's just like filled with mulch. It's like so dirty. And
Yeah.
and he looks out the window and the view is just bricks out his window.
Yeah.
Which also gives you a sense of the comedy that's going to come through in this film. That's what's so amazing about the film is the mix of
There
darkness
is
and
some
heaviness.
comedy in
And
it,
so,
yeah.
I laughed so hard during this film. Like it's hilarious. It's as hilarious as it is disturbing, and that's a really
Yeah, that's
beautiful
a
combination.
yeah, absolutely. And like for me watching it, should we discuss the plot? Are we discussing the
I
plot?
think
Is
we
this the
should.
discussion?
Let's just go for it. I'm sorry, I don't want to hold back on talking about this because it's so crazy.
so like I'll give it a go if you want, and you chip in. So Jack Nance plays Henry in this world that we've described that's very strange and nightmarish, and essentially from the get-go it seems like he has a baby, like an egg of some description, a little swaddling is delivered by a guy who pulls a lever, the man in the planet. So it's all very
Wait,
mysterious,
but that's like the opening scene before we meet Henry. We have this.
Mm.
Well, actually, no, Henry's in that scene. Oh God, it's his head is there, isn't it? It pops up.
Can't remember right at
It's
the
all
start.
such a the phrase fever dream. I think it was made
Oh yeah,
for
for this
this film, but it's more than a fever dream. It's like I was trying to think. I was like, is it a volcanic explosion dream? That's not quite. It's just like a million times the power of the thousand fever dream. But yeah, we start with this strange man in the planet is how he's described in the credits, I think. And yeah, he delivers across space, right? They're like weird sperm. It looks like
Yeah,
giant sperm. Sorry,
yeah,
carry on.
yeah. I know that is all correct, and I really couldn't tell you what the plot is beyond he has a baby and he kind of goes to see his girlfriend who I think he's had the baby with, and it's just it's a series of bizarre encounters either with other people or with Henry back in his flat looking into his radiator, and there's a woman in the radiator, and it's essentially the baby gestating and looking after the baby, and then his head pops off, Henry's head pops off, and there's like an alien, like the baby's head's there, something. And then at the end, he meets the girl in the radiator, and they embrace, and they all live happily ever after. I think, I don't know.
No, not at all. You remember the very end? What happens to the baby?
Wait, what? Hang on,
What he does to the baby?
what? Hang on, what?
You know, he's driven crazy by the baby's crying, and then he stabs the baby, and all this mush comes out.
Oh, yep. Sorry, Jesus Christ.
That's the very
Sorry,
end
Winnie.
of the
I
film,
had
guys. Okay, so I've fully
there's a lot.
spoiled
There's a
it.
lot going on in this. There's a lot going on in this film, and I
Yeah.
kind of yeah.
Yeah, I understand. To be honest, I slightly missed. I don't know at what point. This is why you do need to watch it in the cinema, because you need to be fully distraction free and completely focused.
Yeah.
Because I understand that the lady, in my subsequent research, I understand the lady in the radiator was an idea that came to David Lynch, and it was like, it's Henry's fantasy of happiness and comfort and joy. So it's sort of like he's imagining, it's a fantasy of that there's this woman in the radiator. And I don't know, I somehow missed that part of it. I didn't realize she was in the radiator. I just suddenly see Laurel Near singing with these big cheeks, these strange sort of like, yeah, papier-mâché cheeks, singing this amazingly haunting, creepy song in heaven that's like another iconic moment. It kind of again goes back to my belief that like all films should have a dance sequence. And like similarly, dance sequence, singing sequence, we need this in every film, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And you get one in Eraserhead. Like what surprised me watching it. So this is my first time properly watching the whole thing and giving it my full attention. It just is like, it's like the key to all of David Lynch's work, and especially its relationship to Twin Peaks. I was very surprised at how, Henry is wearing a suit that's very similar to Dale Cooper's. The check pattern on the floor of his where he lives. I know, and even the room that he's in, where he's dancing with the girl in the dress, the girl in the radiator. Sorry, it's very much like the Black Lodge, the kind of the strange space where there's a character dancing in Twin Peaks. I didn't quite realize how very closely linked they all were, and even and Jack Nance pops up in loads of David Lynch's work. I mean, I was watching Lost Highway this week as well, so 2 Lynches in 1 week. It's quite a bit too much. But he's even in Twin Peaks, so it feels like that they exist in the same universe somehow. I don't know.
Oh, absolutely. I think that it seems like, I think it's completely unusual to spend so long making a film. 5 years is pretty much unheard of, especially in terms of, not that it often takes that long for the film to come out, but you're not usually working through that whole time.
Shooting it,
yeah, shooting for that pretty much that whole time. And I feel like what the benefit of that for David Lynch was, it really got him to like refine his artistic style and his like auteur vision, and so it kind of it sort of tracks that the things that he figured out that were part of his work in Eraserhead would then go on to be refined in Twin Peaks. But it's interesting because this is definitely, I think, his most sort of art housey, surreal film. You watch Twin Peaks having never watched a David Lynch film and you think it's completely bonkers and mad, but actually there is a very clear kind of, for the most part, linear plot, and there's some kind of familiar characterization and the way it's all put together, and there's oddness that kind of almost sort of invades it surreptitiously. But where this, it's just all out craziness, and I think that's kind of interesting that he went crazy and then pulled it back. I feel like often it goes the other way around. First time filmmakers maybe aren't quite so sure of their vision and what they want to say and do. And he just knew from the get-go.
Yeah, I think watching, like, especially because I've watched Lost Highway, but what I kind of very quickly picked up with most of Lynch's films after Eraserhead is that he seems to gravitate towards very film noir, almost archetypal plots about mobsters and kind of what do you call them, femme fatales, like, and there's lots of duplicates and clones and lots of things to do with got to get the money and I don't know, it's just very kind of, you'd almost say like B-movie thriller film noir stuff, which he then kind of allows, that's the plot line, but then on top of it he does his David Lynch thing over the top of that, whereas Eraserhead, he doesn't do any of that plot technique. It's just the David Lynch stuff. It's just the pure mainline stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we need to circle back because I feel like in our plot summary, we haven't really gotten into the real, what makes this exactly so crazy, which is, I mean, there's so much, but the main thing I would say is the baby. Okay, because this baby is not like other babies.
No.
It is. How would you describe the baby, James?
Well, I mean, the simplest visual for anyone listening, it's think of the chest burst scene from Alien, and it looks like that. And yeah, I didn't I as soon as I watched Eraserhead, I thought, oh right, so that's kind of must have been the inspiration for Geiger's chest burst because it's so similar. The kind
Yeah.
of the gooey liquid, the shape of the face, everything. It's yeah.
Yes. And apparently David Lynch was furious when he saw Alien because they totally copied his baby for Alien.
And of course, you got to think back in the 70s when this film came out, the only place you would see Eraserhead were these midnight screenings. Physical media didn't exist. VHS, I think, only just was happening. In fact, there's some great behind the scenes of Eraserhead where they shot on black and white VHS tape or early videotape. Anyway, so the point is, the only place you were going to see Eraserhead was at very limited screenings by a very particular audience. So what that meant was you could steal stuff a bit more readily and no one could call you out on it. So clearly people saw Eraserhead, thought, no one will have seen this, let's just copy it. And there it is.
Yeah, so you have this, yes, alien, almost a bit dinosaur-y, but also tadpole fishy creature, but it's just the head, and then its little body is bound up in bandages, but it's almost like just the shape of the body is like a wooden spoon, a large wooden spoon, something like that,
Yeah.
you know. So it's very much a particular kind of a creature, and the film is sort of about parenthood, right? Because Henry discovers that he is a father by being invited to dinner by his girlfriend Mary X, played by Charlotte Stewart, and when he arrives there, there's a very oppressive, creepy, strange energy because he's having dinner with her family, and I mean, I laughed so hard because it's the most uncomfortable, hellish dinner you can imagine. The father is really strange. They serve this tiny chicken that's apparently like man-made, which again was why I was sure it was a film about a post-nuclear world, because the food is weird. It's like tiny, and when he cuts into it, all this blood gushes out. It's like this.
But then you say the father's weird. The mother starts screaming and rolling her eyes back at the dinner table, and then at some point she kind of starts making a move on Henry.
Yeah, she's like telling him off for having. She's asking him inappropriate questions about whether he had sexual relations with her daughter, and then she makes out with his neck or something, and then Mary's like, "Get off him!" Yeah, very odd. So they basically tell him Mary's had a baby. Mary at that point says, is it even a baby? Or you get some idea that this is not a cute,
just going along
baby. And they have to get married is the general consensus. And you can tell Henry maybe isn't really down for it, but he just it's an awkward, he's just going along with it. It's an awkward situation, and he's surprised.
And I love the detail that Henry is on vacation, apparently. He's on vacation.
Yes, again, that is all these little details that bring together this strange, surreal world.
Yeah.
You know, he's doing this kind of menial factory job, but he's on vacation in this hellish place.
Hellish world, like you'd leave, wouldn't you?
But it really feels like you can't. Again, this is definitely a lockdown COVID film, the more I think about it.
Yeah, I mean, the lockdown idea as well, so just to kind of brush into the 5-year production that we mentioned, is that this was while he was at the American Film Institute, essentially a very grand film school, that occupied like a mansion, and it had a stables as part of this mansion, and he basically took over the stables. And the myth behind it is that essentially the film school forgot about him because you're only meant to be at the AFI for 2 years. So he just holed up in the stables, started making this film, and nobody got rid of him, and he was there for 5 years. But the thing is, it was shot. He said the stables became his own like mini studio. So it wasn't that big a space, but they had space to build sets, and so you can feel watching the film that all these sets are crammed into a claustrophobic space that probably isn't quite big enough to comfortably shoot it. So every set feels claustrophobic. The way it's lit, you can almost feel the light. Everything just feels on top of you. So you
Yeah.
get that, like, the lockdown feeling is the fact that it was made in these very cramped, confined space where you almost got the impression that David Lynch probably didn't leave that for days, because they would shoot in the evening. He was probably editing and sleeping throughout the day. So it it does have that claustrophobic, not leaving the house feel to it.
Absolutely. I mean, this again goes back to this idea that the financial restrictions of your film can often be in service to your film, because the atmosphere of the film is what makes it so successful, the oppressive claustrophobic atmosphere. And
Yep.
as you said, it was a requirement. But what's crazy is the film was made for $10,000. And okay, it was the 70s, but that is nothing. That is nothing
For a feature film,
for,
yeah.
for a feature film. And that's partly why the film took so long to make, because they had to do it so slowly. David Lynch, for 2 years of the film, had a paper round, a nighttime paper round. Again, this was partly because of necessity. There were gardeners who worked on the lawns of this mansion where the stables were every day. So for that, and for not wanting background noise around them, they absolutely had to film at night. Though also it totally fits with the vibe of the film and the look of the film. But they would shoot from about midnight till sort of 5, 6 in the morning, until they could hear birds singing, and then it was down tools. Birds, can you hear the birds? But sort of halfway through, David Lynch would have to pause on shooting and go out and do a paper round for an hour.
Which he said he could do it if he needed to. He could do it in an hour, but
Yes.
it was an hour and 8.
Yeah.
If he could just get it, hour and 8 usual, hour if he needed to.
It was probably meant to be like a 4-hour shift, but he would just like race. And sometimes Jack Nance would go with him on the paper round and do the other side. They'd both be throwing the papers out the windows of their car.
I mean, here, what researching all these behind the scenes stories, this is like living the student filmmaker dream. This is it. You're not making a short film, you're making a feature. You've got your own mini studio, and he was talking about how, because he was friends with the guy who ran the kit store, that basically gave him a couple of 2 35mm cameras, so they had an entire kit room full of stuff. He befriended the guy who did the audio mix. I think he was actually also involved with the sound department at the school, so they got all the gear they wanted. So he basically had his own mini production studio, and he was left alone for 5 years. And another reason why it took so long, I think, is because they did not have a big crew. Like, when you look at the behind the scenes, it's like 4 or 5 people, so
and they just
couldn't
did
move
everything
that fast. Yeah, and shout out to Catherine Coulson, who
Log Lady
was Log Lady.
Log
Like,
Lady
again,
from
the
Twin
links.
Peaks.
Log Lady from Twin Peaks met and worked with David Lynch here because she auditioned for a part as a nurse that never even got filmed, but she
was married to Jack Nance. So when he got cast as Henry, even though ultimately she never actually starred in the film, she was there with them, and she just like, made herself part of the crew, and she did everything. Like, she learned how to be a camera assistant.
Clapper loading and everything. And camera assisting is like an entire job in itself that she just learned as one of the many things to do. And I didn't realize that it was during the 4 years worth of filming that they, just to, I guess, to keep the spirits up, her and David Lynch created this character called the Log Lady while they were making Eraserhead. So then years later, he puts it in Twin Peaks. It's like, Jesus Christ, there's like some, maybe there's not, even if it's not on the same, like, if it's not in the same universe, the fact that these things that were created in the 70s in this unique melting pot of creativity found an outlet years later on, like, what was at the time the most talked about TV show on the planet, maybe.
Yes, and let's just pause to reflect on the fact that to keep spirits up, they came up with a character called Log Lady, who has essentially a sort of pet or baby log. I just, when I was watching the film, I was so kind of perplexed, but also like, wow, this is amazing, because I really feel like what I'm watching is the interior of David Lynch's brain, and it's unsettling and eerie, but I'm also quite enjoying being in that. And then I saw that Danny Lee, one of the Guardian's film critics, had basically said the same thing about what Eraserhead is. And again, this creation of this character of a Log Lady on set, again, just sort of reflects the particularness of David Lynch's mind, and the fact that everyone around him, okay, it was a very small crew of 5 people, and the actors, but everyone wanted to help him make this thing. They really bought into the thing that he
Oh
his
yeah.
vision. And that's amazing. The fact that the actors would work for 4 years on this film with him
Yep.
is just extraordinary. But I think there is something about working with someone who knows exactly what they want to make that it's
Mm.
very inspiring, and you want to be part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I suspect there were a lot of people who dismissed him who didn't get it, but then he had the people who were into it, who got it. They were really into it. I mean, like Catherine Coulson, she worked a day job as a waitress. She said one of 4 jobs that she had, but one of them was a waitress. And then she started cooking food for them as well as being a camera assistant. And it's just
Hmm.
like, to want to do all those jobs, and then of course David Lynch did the classic thing that the myth of the student filmmaker is help me out for free on my film, and when I make it big, I'll make sure I don't forget you. And David Lynch absolutely stuck to his word.
Though I will say, actually, what's amazing about David Lynch is he didn't make people work for free. He, on principle, paid everyone $25 a week to work on
Ah.
this film until it got to a point where the AFI weren't giving them any funding anymore, and they were pretty much broke. Then it went down to $12.50, and then towards the very end, he was basically like, okay, we're completely out of money. I'm also completely out of film. We're nearly there, but we're just going to have to stop. And everyone said, no way. And so so everyone started, when they came to set each day, they would stop by like a film shop and buy film for the camera. Everyone contributed.
Wow.
So only at the very end were they working for free, which is kind of, I love that. I love David Lynch's complete respect for and appreciation of everyone who worked with him. It's so amazing. But sorry, carry on with the next part
No.
of the story because I love it.
Well, I mean, no, but even like I say, even the £25, not much. It was more a token gesture, but still something.
Yes,
But the fact is,
there would have been
he
more in
didn't.
those days. But yeah, you're
Of
right. You're right.
course,
You're
yeah.
right.
But Jack Nance pops up in Blue Velvet and also Twin Peaks and in Lost Highway. Catherine Coulson worked with him throughout, I think, in various roles and as the log lady. And his cinematographer Frederick Elms, who they went to shoot, I think, Blue Velvet together, and I think Lost Highway. But basically the collaborators he worked with there, they continued to be a part of his career when he had the money and he was able to pay them. He didn't forget about them, which can often happen.
Yes, but the best thing is that at the very end, once they'd finally finished working on this film, after actually, I think at that point, 6 years had gone by since the very inception, they all sat down together. I think it was at Hamburger Hamlet. And David Lynch said, I want everyone to have a bit of this film because you all worked on it. It's all yours too. So they sort of on napkins wrote up their agreement on what percentage everyone would have. And Catherine Coulson said that still to this day, she gets an annual check for Eraserhead. Obviously, at the time, no one thought it was going to do anything. But of course it has. And she said that money helped put my daughter through college. So I'm so grateful to David Lynch for that.
What a great guy.
He's an angel.
So, yeah, I mean, that just shows what a kind of, he's a real filmmaker. He's the real deal. But what was interesting as well, watching the credits, because I love, especially on these first films, watching the credits, especially the thanks credits. And Sissy Spacek got a thanks, and I was like, I wonder what her involvement or help was for that film.
Oh, I do know. If you don't know, do you not know?
I don't know.
Oh.
Please tell me.
Okay, well, I'm having to pull out of my brain. So, at the time, Sissy Spacek was married to Jack Fisk, who plays the man.
Plays the man in the planet.
Man in the planet.
World.
And besides that, she basically just really believed in the film. So they both contributed lots of money. They financially backed the film. That was the basic thing. I think she also helped out a bit on it, doing odd jobs to help, and regularly donated to the cost of filming. Amazing. All these quirky people who got it. They just got David Lynch's thing.
Exactly. I mean, and it was the 70s, man. You're working on Razorhead. That's that's the filmmaker dream. But yeah, just to have that much control, to be able to take that much time on a film, like that's again, as a filmmaker, you want to be able to get your vision exactly as you imagine it. And yeah, it must be tough. It must have been tough for him, because think like not many years later. So I think his next film was Elephant Man, which is, I've not seen Elephant Man, but from what I understand, it's much more a straight narrative.
Yeah.
Because Mel Brooks, the producer of that, who's obviously known for his comedies, but Elephant Man is a straight film. He saw Eraserhead and thought, you're the guy for this. And then Then Dino De Laurentiis saw Elephant Man and thought, you know what? He's the guy to direct Dune. So he, within less than a decade, because I think Dune went into production like in the early 80s, so let's say 4 or 5 years after Eraserhead, he's now got a huge crew with a massive multi-million-pound budget, and he's got visual effects. But it's not just him and his friends. I mean, he got Frederick Elms to shoot some second unit in Dune. But it wasn't the same, I mean, and he said those making Dune was 4 years of his life that he just wished, it was a waste of 4 years for him. He said.
Oh yeah, I can.
No, I loved it.
You lie. I know.
I love that Dune because it's mad, because it is
It
mad,
is
because it's
mad.
David Lynch trying to do a fucking Star Wars film, and so
Yeah.
there's a lot to admire, but I can understand where he came from only a few years earlier. The environment and the conditions he's working under, it must have been very, very exhausting for him.
Yeah, completely different, because I think you mentioned the fact that he not only was filming in these stables almost sort of secretly, because like you said, like he'd sort of been forgotten, but he was also from a certain point he moved in, because at the point where he had the idea for Razorhead, he was married and had just had his first daughter, which is an interesting one given the subject matter of the film.
I know.
So there is like some debate about whether or not the idea for the film came from the fact of him being a first-time father, and his daughter was born with clubbed feet, is the phrase that I've heard online. I don't know if that is still the term one would use, but that's what I read. And she herself has talked about understanding that to be the inspiration for the film. But David Lynch, interestingly, basically disagrees with that. He kind of amazingly says that, like, I don't really remember where the film idea came from, other than I know that Philadelphia was the main inspiration, because he said that he was born in the Northwest, but then moved to Philadelphia and spent 5 years there as a kid, which he described as being filled with violence, hate, and filth. and so his kind of he also describes Eraserhead as his Philadelphia story, which if you've seen a Philadelphia story, it's kind of quite funny.
Which to complete that quote, I actually he says it's my Philadelphia story, but without James Stewart. Like, that's the only difference. There's no James Stewart. That's the only difference.
Which is personal trivia. That's my dad's favorite movie, A Philadelphia Story. Philadelphia Story, sorry. So we don't really know exactly where the idea came from, but that was going on in the background. And then during filming, he broke up with his wife and then moved into Henry's bedroom, the bedroom that you see in the film.
Oh my God, are you kidding?
He was sleeping in Henry's bedroom, and he said that he wasn't allowed to be there. So what they would do is they would shoot at night, as we said, until about 5 or 6 in the morning, and then he would put a big piece of wood across the door, bolt it across, and the cast would padlock him inside. So then if you're a security guard walking past, you'll think, oh, it's just a locked room. Obviously no one's in there because it's padlocked from the outside. And it was, he said it was the perfect place to sleep because there were no windows. So it was very dark. So I sleep very well.
That's mad.
And he'd be sleeping during daylight hours, obviously, because he would sleep from when filming ended until sort of the early afternoon, when he would start writing up his storyboards for the day, because he didn't have a script. Basically, he just had an outline, and he would draw these little boxes of a storyboard that no one else could understand. And then they start filming. So he must have basically got about, if he was lucky, if he ever left maybe an hour or two of sunlight once he actually left that bedroom. But he was basically living in Eraserhead for 4-5 years.
My God, I did not know that little nugget. But again, all makes sense. It's like he was literally living that film. He was living, sleeping, dreaming about the film.
Yeah.
Random little tangent, but I heard that on again, this is one of these like unsubstantiated claims, but apparently
so don't come for us if it's not true.
Yeah, don't come for us. But Stanley Kubrick made Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman sleep in their apartment set. I mean, maybe.
Yes, I'm glad we've been brought on to Stanley Kubrick, because as we like to in every episode mention the Kubes, and if we can, Christopher Nolan. I don't know if you have a Christopher Nolan connection, but we have a Stanley Kubrick one, which is that David Lynch loved Stanley Kubrick, and Stanley Kubrick saw Eraserhead, loved it, thought it was the best movie he'd ever seen, started telling everyone it was his favorite movie, and he made the cast of The Shining and the crew watch Eraserhead before they started filming to get the right vibe and energy and atmosphere, exactly. And you can see there are
You can
certain
absolutely tell.
shots that are inspired by Eraserhead, right? In The
And
Shining.
the music and the soundtrack, that kind of omnipresent kind of like claustrophobic soundtrack that just
Yeah.
seems to kind of get inside your head. Yeah, you can really tell.
Do you have a Nolan connection? Can you make one?
I
It's like six
I
degrees of
can make it.
separation.
I can make it. It's really lame at the off the top of my head. Both their debut features were shot on black and white film. And
Okay, good.
It's a little bit, and you know and the central characters both wearing black suits. You know, so there's a little something there. I mean, I'm sure that Nolan was completely aware of Eraserhead when he was making Following. But it's interesting how you said at the very start, actually, Lee, about how some directors, it's not quite their first film; it's when they start getting a bit of money. Absolutely the case with Nolan. Following is not an Eraserhead kind of like amazing. This like the film that unlocks all of his work, and it's like it's the film that got him the budget to make Memento, which is like really where the Christopher Nolan story starts, I would say.
The thing with it is that it's very much an art house film. Like, it's not clear what David Lynch is trying to say, and that's definitely completely deliberate. You know, when he's been interviewed a lot about Razorhead over the years, and he's never explained what the film means from his perspective, and he's talked about.
Oh, you should never do that. Never
do
that.
No, you should never do that. But and most directors don't really. But at the same time, usually it's quite obvious, right? At least in Hollywood, American cinema, you know, a clear narrative is what you expect. And actually, when he was first given the funding, it was not for Eraserhead, but it was for a script he'd written prior to that. And the kind of people at the top of AFI liked it. But then other board members didn't like that they were going to give money to David Lynch, because they said, no, this isn't the kind of films we should be making. So there was definitely, it's kind of a miracle that he even got the film made, because there was definitely some resistance. Because it feels much more European than like a Hollywood movie, right?
Yeah, and I think he's very much about, it's the experience of his films. That's what's the important thing, which is why, you know, I think he wants you to watch it in the theatre, he wants you to feel it, and the sound, you know, he puts a lot of effort into the soundtrack. I mean, interesting note, when we screened Lost Highway for the student cinema last week, the disc failed and I had to restart everything. So I was going to the menu to try and skip to the scene that we're at, and there was no skipping scenes. It was just one long clip. You couldn't actually skip to your scene. It didn't have it. And I was like, he's done that deliberately. It was a Criterion collection. So he's like, he doesn't want you to skip around the film. He wants you to sit there and watch it from the start to the end to get the vibe of it, I think.
You know, because I watched this now about a week ago, I was like, oh, should I watch it again just before we talk? But you know what? It was it was so heavy going. You know, when I watched it, I was going to see Conclave, you know, the Stanley Tucci.
Oh, I'm going to see that tonight.
Oh, really? Yeah, well, I was about to go see that, and actually I was so grateful to be seeing it, because I just really needed a palate cleanser. I was like, yes, I need some Popes in a scandal, in a psychological thriller that will just like cleanse me of this intensity, you know, the heaviness, even though it was like a real thrill to watch, and it's amazing, and I would recommend it. But yeah, you definitely need to like steel yourself for the experience. But I want to talk a bit more about this, about how the film got its cult following, because I think it definitely is a sad thing to learn about. Like, when you look at how the industry has changed since the 70s, because the film basically, once David Lynch had finally made the movie, no one really wanted it. You know, like, it wasn't getting into film festivals. People didn't get it. And finally it got a release at the Film X festival in LA. And apparently once the film was screened, there was just dead silence. And everyone was like, oh, fuck. But then there was applause. So people were kind of shocked, but then we're into it. But it basically didn't really get picked up after that. But thanks to, you mentioned these midnight screenings. Well, there's a guy called Ben Baron-Holtz, who I'm now obsessed with. And I feel like we should do an episode just on him, because he's the grandfather of the midnight film. That's how it's described, because he was the one who came up with this idea. He opened the cinema in New York, the Elgin Cinema, and would do these midnight screenings on Fridays and Saturdays. And it was there on a Friday night. You could see Eraserhead every single Friday at midnight for 4 years. And because of that, it got this notoriety. You know, people at that time, it was a thing to go to the midnight screening of a film because you would see something truly unique, art house, different. And that was how this film became known. And because of that slow burn, and, you know, they didn't have to pay anything for that, by the way. Ben said, I love this movie. I want to show it. Just give me the film. You know, I'm like, I won't charge you for it. And so there basically wasn't even any marketing for Eraserhead, but it just slowly built this cult following.
Right.
And like would never happen now. And I really feel like someone needs to bring that back. Because I think part of it is that like the fact that it was on every single week for this many years, you get to know it. Just like with The Room, you know, The Room being shown at the Prince Charles Cinema regularly for years since it first came out has made it a thing and made and you need that slow burn. And I wish more cinemas would do that, because that would be a way, I think, to get people to come back to the cinema, because that's such a thing, that's such an event. I want to see Eraserhead in the cinema. You want to see these strange films. You don't want to see them on your bed, on your laptop, on your phone, you know?
Absolutely not. You want to be around other people, so it's not just you having a strange experience. So maybe afterwards you can all go, what the hell was that in the bar?
Everyone go for a drink and decompress after seeing that crazy film. It sounds perfect.
I about 20 years ago in Manchester, there was a cinema that's sadly long gone, and you would be calling it a flea pit, and that would be accurate. It was a rundown old cinema, but they had midnight screenings, and I've seen The Thing and Stanley Kubrick's The Shining for £1. The tickets were £1 at midnight off a really scratchy old film print, you know. So like, amazing. Just the atmosphere, and you know, and everybody there, they've made a concerted effort to come and see this film at midnight. They haven't just rocked up at the cinema at 5 and gone, let's see what's on. So even the crowd of people there, we're all into it. So yeah, the midnight movie, maybe we need to stage a comeback with it.
I think we do. I think that's what that should be our mission going forward for Groovy Movies. We're going to bring back the midnight screening.
Okay, well.
Yeah, on that note, guys, thank you so much for listening to another episode of Groovy Movies.
And if you like what you heard, please leave us a review, leave us a like. It all helps to get this podcast out and about into the world.
And we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Groovy Movies is produced and edited by us, Lily Austin and James Brailsford. And James also produced the theme music.
Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Groovy Movies Pod, or email us groovymoviespod@gmail.com.
For more information about the films discussed, check out the show notes.